Hello and welcome to the Black Entrepreneur Blueprint Show. I am your host, Jay Jones. Black Entrepreneur Blueprint was created specifically to educate and inspire Black entrepreneurs to launch, build, and grow successful businesses. Join us as we help build an economic power base in the Black community by promoting business ownership. If you are currently an entrepreneur or want to be an entrepreneur, we invite you to join us every week here at Black Entrepreneur Blueprint.
Welcome to the Black Entrepreneur Blueprint, episode number 355. I'm your host, Jay Jones, and today we have another outstanding and informative show in store for you. Today's show topic is how to start a successful podcast and make money in 2021. How to start a successful podcast and make money in 2021. On today's show, I'm going to talk about something that people ask me all the time: how to start a successful podcast. And since I have experience in that field, obviously with over 355 plus episodes, been podcasting for over 6.5 years, I've learned the ins and outs of podcasting. And if I could do it over, I'd show you exactly what I would do to start a successful podcast in 2021. Now, before we get to today's show, I just want to share a few things with the BEB family. First and foremost, I want to welcome all first-time listeners to Black Entrepreneur Blueprint. Welcome to the BEB family. Please stick around until the end of today's broadcast, and I'm going to share all my social media contact information and my resource links, such as the link to my new book, A New Black Wall Street, Circulating the Black Dollar Worldwide by Building Successful E-Commerce Businesses. Also, 2 platforms I've created to help circulate dollars in the worldwide Black economy: BeSmartByBlack.com and HireBlackFreelancers.com. And also my new rebranded, rebooted Black Entrepreneur Blueprint Academy, which you can go to BEBacademy.com. Check it out. 5 days free access to all of my content in terms of my online courses, trainings, and workshops. So you get 5 days to try it free before you're charged anything. So this gives you an opportunity to try before you buy. I also have a special announcement that I want to talk about real quickly. Now, I wanted to invite the BEB family to a podcast training session. It's actually 2 sessions. So if you're interested in starting a podcast and want to know how to monetize it, or if you currently have a podcast and you're not getting traction and you're not monetizing it the way you feel you should be, I want you to join me on Tuesday, May 11th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for session number 1, and then Tuesday, May 18th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for session number 2. And you can go to BEBpodcastprofits.com. Go to BEBpodcastprofits.com, and you can learn more about this live training and workshop. Now, session number 1, we're going to focus on the what, the why, and the how to create a profitable podcast and the components you're going to need to do so. At the end of session 1, we're going to have a Q&A, and you'll have some light homework to complete before session 2. In session 2, we're going to do a follow-up training where we're going to discuss the implementation of the tools to start your podcast and to get you ready to start building your list before your podcast drops. Now, I can only work with 10 people. Once again, when I do interactive stuff, I only bring on a group of 10 people because I can actively work with you if you need some individual attention. So it's going to be available for the first 10 people. So go to BEBpodcastprofits.com, BEBpodcastprofits.com, and enroll. And if you try to enroll and it won't let you enroll, that means that all of the spots have been taken. So let me tell you real quick what you're going to learn. You're going to learn how to find the best topic or subject for a winning podcast. That's very important. You'll also learn how to systematically start your new podcast or grow your existing podcast using the latest strategies and techniques. So stuff that worked when I started in 2014 isn't the same stuff that I use now to grow and build my podcast in 2021. You'll also learn how to position your podcast and your platform to attract maximum sponsorship or advertising revenue, and also additional monetization ideas. So once again, guys, if you're doing a podcast to help increase your business or for your business, you need to know how to monetize it. Also, I'm going to give you a simple formula to grow your podcast audience. This is something that I wish I knew when I started, that I had to learn in the process. Also, you're going to learn how to format your podcast, meaning lay out your show and generate content ideas so each show will be able to run smoothly and you're not going to have to knock your head around to find the content. Also, you're going to receive my email templates and forms to attract the right guests. So there's different types of podcasts. So if you want guests on your podcast, then you're going to need the right types of templates and forms and emails to get those guests on the show. And it's a whole lot more. So it's going to be a 2-day, once again, Tuesday, May 11th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time is session 1. Tuesday, May 18th, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, session 2. If you enroll in the program and you happen to miss one or both of the sessions, you will automatically have 24/7, 365-day access to the replays on both session 1 and session 2. You're also going to receive a workbook that is going to actually take you step by step on how to start a successful podcast or how to grow an existing podcast. And once again, guys, this comes from 6.5 years of experience doing it and having the #1 downloaded Black Entrepreneur podcast right now in the world. So my thing is all about the downloads. And in today's show, we're going to talk about some of the options that you can do and some of the styles of podcasts that you can create. And we're also going to look at podcasts as it is opposed to YouTube channel or YouTube videos and other type of content. So let's get ready for today's show. And don't forget, if you're interested, go to BEBpodcastprofits.com and be one of the first 10 to enroll in the program. All right, let's get ready to rock, family. How to start a successful podcast and make money in 2021. So as I just mentioned, guys, this is one of the biggest questions that people ask me. How do I start a successful podcast? Now, I know you're probably thinking that, man, there's so much noise out there. Is anybody really going to listen to my podcast? Excuse me. And the answer is yes. So you just have to know how to position that podcast and target the specific audience that you want to talk to. And we're going to talk about some of the things or misnomers that people have about podcasting. Now, what I will tell you is you're not going to get rich off of a podcast right away. You won't get rich off of a podcast right away. This is something for the long game. And I always talk about building assets, building content. So those podcast episodes, that's content. That content is going to be evergreen. It's going to be out there. One of the funniest things is when I look at my statistics on my shows, I can look at and find out every day what episodes people are listening to. And so most people think, oh, they're probably listening to the latest episode. But that all depends. I have some weeks or some days that I look and an episode from 3 or 4 months ago is getting more traction than a more recent episode. So remember, it's evergreen content that's always going to be there. So this is something that's very important if you're looking to build your brand. So let's start off real quick with what is a podcast. And so you have different variations right now, but originally a podcast is a digital audio file available on the internet for either download or on-demand listening. So now I see people say I have a podcast, but it's on YouTube. And we're going to talk about video podcasts versus audio podcasts. And I'm going to tell you the difference and why I think you should really focus on the audio portion. Not that you shouldn't have a video portion, but we're going to discuss that. So a podcast is a digital audio file available on the internet to listen to or download on demand. Okay. Why do you want to start a podcast? So there's several reasons. If you are an entrepreneur, if you own a business or you're thinking about starting a business, content is one of the biggest things that you're going to need to help create and build a platform. And I will talk about platforms today because I'm trying to drill it in your head that if you build a platform, you will have a much easier time monetizing anything that you're trying to do. Okay, so why do you want to start a podcast? Here's some of the benefits. Number one, building a platform. Okay. Number two, building authority in your niche. So people have the opportunity to listen to you and understand that, hey, this person knows exactly what they're talking about. So you're building authority in your niche, which is crucial. Number three, you can create multiple revenue streams from the podcast. I always tell you guys, when you podcast, you're not going to get rich off of a podcast, especially not when you start out. But there's a way you can position your podcast as a piece of your ecosystem that's going to help generate massive revenues if you do it correctly. Number four, you can create important relationships. So when I interview these guys on the podcast, excuse me, when I interview these guys on the podcast, many times I probably wouldn't even be able to talk to these people if I didn't have a podcast. One of the things that a podcast does, guys, is you're giving somebody else a platform to speak. And what do most people want to do? They want to talk about themselves, right? So if I reached out to, say, Killer Mike and said, hey, man, if I didn't have a platform, I'd love to talk to you about something. And yeah, he'd be like, yeah, whatever, bro. And I would never hear from him, even if I could even get in contact with him. But if you have a platform and you're providing a benefit to your guests, then, hey, oh, yeah, let me come on the show. You have a platform, you have an audience, let me talk to an audience. So people like that and with that type of status, they're so used to people always trying to take from them. But you're coming with a platform and you're going to give them the floor on your platform. So you get to create and make a lot of important relationships. And another benefit of why you want to start a podcast, if you do it right, you can make money. All right. So that's the what is the podcast. The why are some of the benefits. Build a platform, build authority in your niche, create multiple revenue streams from the podcast, create important relationships, and make money. All right, now let's talk about podcasting versus other platforms. So once again, a platform is just the ability to communicate with your audience. Okay, so you can have, there's three types of mediums when we talk about platforms. There's video platforms, audio platforms, and obviously they're written platforms. So one of the most popular video platforms is YouTube. Now, you don't own that YouTube platform, but you can create your own YouTube channel, and now people can connect with you on the platform. So that's a video platform. Audio platform could be podcasting or radio, terrestrial radio or digital radio. And the other medium is written medium. So it could be a book, it could be a blog, it could be whatever, but it's a written medium. And so we're going to talk about podcasting versus YouTube, which is a video, podcasting versus written, which is a blog or newsletter, and podcasting versus radio. And so I just want to give you a little breakdown of where podcasting stands in terms of these other mediums. So podcasting versus YouTube. So podcasting, guys, is an intentional listen. Podcasting is an intentional listen. So you guys know every Monday morning, 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Jay Jones and Black Entrepreneur Blueprint is coming out with some new content, some new heat. All right. So that is an intentional listen. You may not listen to it at 5 a.m. that Monday, but you know every week something's coming out from Jay Jones and BEB. All right. And it's an intentional listen. You're not flipping through the dial on say, or the radio or something or the TV, and you happen to see something that catches your attention. So it's very intentional, and that makes a big difference versus YouTube. You ever go on YouTube and you watch a short video and then it gives you a recommended video. Then you look up 20, 30 minutes later, you're sitting here watching all these videos that you had no intention of watching. So it's very different. Podcasting is intentional. YouTube, a lot of times it may start off intentional, but you may get pulled down a rabbit hole, start looking at stuff you had no idea that you even wanted to look at. Okay. Now, another statistic is podcast listeners, studies show, listen to more than 80% of the podcast episode. Okay. Versus YouTube, where the attention span is minutes, usually less than 3 to 5 minutes. So you have to understand it's a totally different medium. Okay. So it's a different type of listener. So one of the things about podcasting versus YouTube or videos is that you can consume podcast content while you're doing other things like driving, exercising, walking, running, whatever. You can consume that content versus being video content. Most times you're going to watch that. Now, I know sometimes if I see a YouTube video, I'll lay my phone down and just listen to the audio of that. And I know people do that, but you're not programmed to do that when you're listening or watching YouTube or you're watching video. You're programmed to watch it. So that's why when they call radio or anything audio, they call radio the theater of the mind, meaning that you have to really visualize and pay attention. So even though you're driving to work Monday morning, you can still listen to this podcast and get nuggets and jewels out of it. You can still be on the treadmill working out, energizing your brain and your body at the same time, listening to a podcast. You can be walking, just taking a leisurely stroll. That's what I like to do. I'll run and I'll walk and I'll exercise with podcasts on. Okay, so you can do multiple things. And here's something that people tell me all the time. Yeah, I'm listening to your podcast while I'm at work trying to get out of this dungeon. And so even at work, you put your podcast, your headphones in or whatever, and you can listen to podcasts even while you're doing something else. So audio is a lot different from video. So that's podcasting versus YouTube. Let's talk about podcasting versus a blog or newsletter, which is written content. Once again, podcasting is intentional and you can listen while you're doing other things. When you're reading a blog or a newsletter, that's a singular focus. Now, you may have music on in the background or whatever, but you can't really multitask when you're reading and trying to decipher content. Okay. And that can be good or bad. All right. So many people don't want to take the time to read too, unless they're super interested in the topic or subject. So a lot of times a listener will, they'll sooner listen to something or watch something versus read something. So once again, that audio is the theater of the mind. You can do other things and multitask while still listening to audio. Now, I'm not saying things that you got to really use that brain power, but if you're just exercising, walking, running, or driving, I use my time in my car as an educational time. I don't listen to a lot of terrestrial radio. Most of the stuff that I listen to are podcasts and educational things that are going to help me level up. So what we're talking about today, guys, is how to start a successful podcast and make money in 2021. All right, we're talking about podcasting versus other platforms. Now, let's talk about podcasting versus other audio, which we'll just say is radio, terrestrial radio, or online radio. So once again, podcasting is an on-demand listening versus terrestrial radio, which is over-the-airwaves radio that may involve flipping stations. I know a lot of people use Spotify, whatever, they got their own playlist now, whatever. But if you're listening to terrestrial radio, a lot of times you'll flip the stations. It's not as intentional as tuning into a podcast, okay? Now, radio shows do have streams. I don't know what the stats are, but I probably can venture to say that most people don't turn on their local radio stream. If they missed it earlier today, they'll just turn on the radio for whatever time it is right now, and they'll catch what's on right now. So I think one of the biggest things about podcasting, guys, it's intentional, meaning that the people that come to and listen to your podcast are coming there for a reason. And when we talk about revenue and monetization and advertising and sponsorship, that is key. So you'll see a lot of people with, this video on YouTube got a million downloads or a million views. The video may be 15 minutes long, but the average people may watch the video maybe 2 minutes. So just because you see all of those views on the video, how engaged are the people that are watching it? Especially if it's a video that was recommended to them after they just watched the previous video. Whereas your numbers might not be as great on your downloads for a podcast, but I can guarantee you, based on statistics, the time people spend intentionally listening to your podcast is people that are much more engaged than people watching videos. Now, let's talk about some of the pros and cons of starting or having your own podcast. So some of the pros of starting or having your own podcast. You can actually start a podcast with very little money. And we're going to get into that, and I'm going to break that down later on in today's episode. Also, another pro is you can actually personally connect with your audience, build a relationship and a rapport. So one of the things that I hear all the time from the BEB family members, if they're on one of the live trainings or whatever, and you guys get to interact with me live and go back and forth, that people tell me, man, you're just like you are on the podcast. So they get to know me personally. So I'm connecting with the audience just by being myself. Another thing that I hear is when I write books, when people read the books, they tell me, hey, I hear you as I read the book, because I write purposely the way I speak. So I don't try to bedazzle everybody with all these big words. I try to put it where the goats can get it. And so once again, I'm building that personal relationship. I'm connecting and building a rapport. Another pro of a podcast is you get to help people depending upon the type of podcast that you start. So if you're trying to do something in personal finance, you may be giving tips or advice to help people. So that's definitely a benefit. Okay. Another pro that you can have with a podcast is people can consume your content while, once again, they're driving, walking, working out, or even at work. So they can consume that audio content almost anywhere, especially if they have headphones, right? Now, another pro is you don't need 1 million listeners to make money. That's one of the misnomers. If you have a tight, focused audience, a niche audience, that's what advertisers are looking for. So if you can connect with Black entrepreneurs, right, that's a great niche. So there's tons of different sponsors and advertisers that would love to tap into that market. So don't worry about trying to do 1 million downloads. I'm going to tell you, you can, if you got 20,000 downloads a month and you have a nice niche audience, you can make real good money. Okay. But there are keys to getting that. Another benefit is you can leverage your guest audience to build your audience. So if you have guests on your show, you can leverage their audience, have them send out social media posts and notifications that can help increase your audience. So those are some of the pros. Now, let's look at some of the cons here. The biggest thing when I talk to people who are interested in starting a podcast, I tell them it's a commitment, man. You know, once again, every Monday morning, 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, I don't care, hell or high water, you getting some content from Jay Jones and Black Entrepreneur Blueprint. Now, if I'm traveling a lot, there's something going on in the family, or I'm sick or whatever, you may get a rebroadcast, but I haven't done a rebroadcast, I think, in over a year. So once you have that base of content, you got to make sure that you're committed to getting it out a specific time that your listeners and your audience knows about. I've talked to people that create a podcast that have no schedule. Yeah, I'm going to do it every week, or maybe I'll do it every 2 weeks or when I feel like it. I guarantee you will not build an audience that way. And here's the thing with a podcast, guys. You need to podcast at least once a week. Once a week is good. At least once a week. People know that it's coming out. They can look forward to it. So you need to be on the schedule. You need to let your audience know, hey, every Monday morning, 5 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on all platforms, a new episode is dropping. So they looking for you. All right. Another con is it can be time consuming. So if you're running a business or you have a job and you're doing a podcast, it can be time consuming. So you have to learn how to schedule correctly. And if you're interviewing people and you have a job, then you need to be able to schedule around your job and get people to interview. Another con is you got to cut through a lot of the clutter, man, of the other podcasts. So podcasting, guys, people think that it's overblown. It's really just in its infancy. It's just in its infancy, and you need to learn how to cut through that clutter of other podcasts and other content. Had a conversation with one of my first cousins day before yesterday. He's thinking about starting a podcast. He was like, "Yeah, man, I'm gonna wait till it calms down a little." I'm like, "Bruh, that ain't gonna happen." I said, "You are in the infancy. You just don't realize it." So when I started in 2014, which was eons ago in the podcast space, the industry has grown by leaps and bounds, and it's going to continue to grow. The faster you get your foothold in there, the better off you're going to be. And remember, it's all about expectations. What do you expect from your podcast? And we'll get into that later on in the show. And we're also going to be talking about during the live training, BEBpodcastprofits.com. Also, another con is you got to be able to provide quality content. You can't just be on there making up crap. It depends on what your show is. Now, if you have an entertainment show, that's something different. But if you're trying to teach people or give people actionable steps, you got to make sure that you provide quality content. If not, people are going to catch on and they're going to drop off. And people got to know that you're the real deal, right? So they have to know that you know what you're talking about. So if I came on here and I started trying to do a podcast on molecular energy, right, you would know right away, yo, this dude doesn't know what he's talking about. What's he saying? He don't even know what he's saying. So you got to make sure that you have quality content. And one of the ways you can get quality content is to be in or be immersed in the subject or topic that your podcast is about. So if you're doing a podcast on personal finance, right? Maybe you're a CPA. Maybe you're a personal finance consultant or a financial consultant. So people are going to pick up on if this cat really knows what they're talking about or not. And if you're not authentic and people don't feel you, then trust me, your podcast isn't going to get a lot of traction. Next, we want to talk about deciding your podcast style and topic. Deciding your podcast style and topic. So you want to have a topic or subject that you enjoy or are passionate about. So I've been thinking for years about starting a boxing podcast. I started to do it. I did a little something on YouTube for a couple of weeks, and it just got overwhelming. YouTube, obviously, when you're creating videos, that's a lot of content. You can always have somebody to create it. But I love boxing. I just don't right now have the bandwidth to do it. So you got to make sure when you're deciding your podcast style and topic that it's something that you enjoy and you're passionate about. And even if you're passionate about something, doesn't mean that, damn, sometimes you don't feel like making an episode. So sometimes if I got a lot going on, I love once I get the mic and turn the mic on, I'm good. But getting to the mic sometimes is like, man, I got this to do. I'm behind on that. I got to figure this out. But once I get on the mic, I'm good. And I know this is where I'm supposed to be. So deciding your podcast style and topic. Also, you want a topic or a subject that aligns with your business and your business goals. You want a topic and or subject that aligns with your business and your business goals. Black Entrepreneur Blueprint. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a black entrepreneur. And I help people, build successful, sustainable businesses, launch, build, and grow businesses. I'm in that space. I'm passionate about that. Okay. It aligns with my business. Everything, all of my trainings, my workshops, my webinars, anything that I'm doing, my books, all of my content is geared around my business, which is helping build an economic power base in the black community. All right. So when you're deciding your podcast style or topics, once again, it needs to align with your business and your business goals to enable you to monetize it. Not that, like, even if I had a boxing podcast and I got enough traction, I could monetize it, but that wouldn't necessarily be aligned with what my real business is. Another thing you have to look at is a topic or a subject that can be monetized, obviously. Now, you can pretty much monetize everything, or anything, but there's certain things that you can monetize a lot easier than other things. And I'm gonna give you an example real quick, but let me just finish these. You have to have a topic or subject that other people have interest in. You need to have a big enough audience for you to get traction. Now, it doesn't have to be super crazy. You don't want to make it too big, but it needs to be big enough. So for those of you that don't know, when I started this, I actually started on an AM station in Philly, and my show was called The Entrepreneur Advantage, right? And I used to come out, I think it was every Tuesday at 11 a.m. The Entrepreneur Advantage, very general, right? So that could be any type of entrepreneur. But then I said, you know what? I need to niche the show down and focus on something specific where I can get traction, but still have enough people that have an interest in it. So I niched it down and changed it to Black Entrepreneur Blueprint. Same stuff dealing with entrepreneurship, but from a lens or perspective of a black entrepreneur, which I am. And the last thing you want to talk about in terms of deciding your podcast style and topic, do you want to do an interview style podcast? Okay. Do you want to do an interview style podcast? So if you do an interview style podcast, that means that you don't have to create as much content, and you can also leverage your guest audience. So you can help leverage their audience by sending out the links, have them send out their links to their audience via social media. Another thing you want to look at too, guys, is how long your podcast is going to be. How long it's going to be. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Neil Patel. He's a real big podcaster. And also Billy Jean. He's a brother that does a lot of marketing. They have podcasts that come out Monday through Friday, but they're only about 5 minutes long. And really what they're giving is a quick lesson, like a 5-minute lesson. Once again, it comes out daily, and they're just breaking down lessons and things like that. So your podcast doesn't have to be 45 minutes or an hour long. So the reason my podcast, especially when I interview people, is a little longer, because I try to get as much content out of them and information out of them that will help the BEB family move from point A to B based on their story, and hopefully them giving you actionable steps. When I'm on my solo podcast, I have a very specific agenda where I want to give you guys actionable steps to move you from point A to B, not just up here talking. But let me give you, in terms of deciding your podcast style and topic, let me give you an example, and I'm just going to use a personal finance podcast, right? So if you're a personal finance expert, you're a coach or consultant, say you help people with debt, credit, or whatever, you can create a podcast around that, and you can sell physical products that may be your books, things like that. You can sell digital products, which could be online courses or software. You can sell affiliate products, and you can sell all types of stuff. So if I'm doing a personal finance podcast and I have an affiliate relationship with a credit repair company, that's a no-brainer, right? Because you want to get your credit spruced up so you can, get better interest rates when you get a car, mortgage, and all of that. So now you got credit. That's an area that you can focus on. Excuse me, credit cards. So you can have an affiliate relationship with credit card companies. So if somebody has bad credit or is trying to reestablish credit, it could be a secured card. It could be a re-entry card. Somebody, that's trying to score, get their credit better. All types of things. You could have your own book you're selling. So once again, the podcast can act as an ecosystem. And we're going to talk about some of the tools and the costs and how to get listeners and how to monetize your actual podcast as we move forward. But that's just an example of deciding your podcast, the style, and the topic. So if you have a business and it makes sense, if you're in the travel space, right, you can have a travel podcast. You can bring on people from hotels, from resorts. You can monetize all types of ways. Obviously, with your travel services, you can monetize by selling packages. You can teach people how to be a travel agent. You can do all types of things affiliated or associated with it. So you can sell physical products for your travelers. Say in your newsletter, in your podcast, this podcast is sponsored by ABC Luggage, the best travel luggage available. It could be your luggage. It could be a carry-on bag. It could be a passport carrier. Another example is I told you guys before about a buddy of mine that's starting a wine podcast. And so you can actually be an affiliate for wineries. You don't have to sell the wine yourself, but you can be an affiliate for wineries, and they can actually sell packages. You could talk about or interview a winery, and then you could have an affiliate relationship where people can order wine through the winery. You can make money. I was telling my buddy I was out one day and I saw this nice little wine cooler, not cooler, but a wine carrier. I said, man, they were selling it for like 14 or 15 bucks in the store. And I guarantee you it probably cost about $2 or $3 to manufacture. You can private label that. So whatever it is, it doesn't have to be your business, but if it's a passion or a hobby, there's ways to monetize it, and we'll get to that later on in the show. So today, family, we're talking about how to start a successful podcast and make money in 2021. Next, we want to talk about how to get listeners. You know, that's the biggest thing. So you need an audience. And I just want to give you guys, or temper your expectations. You're not going to have a big audience when you start. It's almost like building up momentum like a snowball rolling down the hill. It's almost exponential growth as you continue to put out that quality content. So I told you guys before, my first episode, I think that first month I started, I only had 176 downloads. And I had 4 episodes. So my family and friends probably were the bulk of those 176 downloads. Okay. So once again, it's a process, but I didn't start the podcast to make money. I started the podcast for cathartic reasons, and it turned into an ecosystem. Now, I wish I was smart enough, or I could tell you that I was smart enough to know what was going to happen, but I didn't. I was doing it because I wanted to get the content out there, and I knew my experiences and the experiences of other successful entrepreneurs can help my community. What happened was the community told me, hey, Jay, we like this. Can you give us some more information on this? Can you help us do that? And so you let your community tell you what they want and need before you start coming out the door with all kinds of different products or services. I didn't start monetizing or even offering anything on the podcast literally for a year and a half. I wanted to see what I had. I wanted to find out what the BEB family wanted. I wanted to see how I could help or best serve my community. So that's something that you got to think about. So we're going to talk about real quick how to get listeners. You know, before we get to the last 2 sections, how to get listeners and monetization, let me just give you all my social media contact information and my resource links. And that way, then we'll get back in and close out the last quarter of the show. So as I mentioned at the top of the show, guys, my new book is out, A New Black Wall Street, Circulating the Black Dollar Worldwide by Building Successful E-Commerce Businesses. You can go to anewblackwallstreet.com, pick yourself up a copy, $14.95 for the print version, $9.95 for the digital version. Also, I mentioned at the top of the show, 2 platforms I've created to help circulate dollars in the worldwide Black community. The first one is besmartbyblack.com. If you are a Black product producer and you want to sell your services to Black consumers worldwide, upload your product information. It is free to besmartbyblack.com and sell your product to Black consumers worldwide. Now, I didn't forget about you freelancers. So if you do anything on Fiverr.com or freelancer.com, go to hireblackfreelancers.com, HIRE, blackfreelancers.com. Upload your information. Once again, it is free. And you can connect with Black consumers and Black businesses that want to hire Black freelancers. I also mentioned at the top of the show my new rebranded, rebooted BEB Academy. All of my online courses and programs, except my flagship program, is behind that academy. All of my trainings, anything from starting a business, financing a business, e-commerce, all of my online trainings, courses, and webinars are there. So you can go to bebacademy.com and you can sign up free, 5 days free access. You have total access to everything in the academy. So try it before you buy it. You literally have nothing to lose. Also, I mentioned at the top of the show too, guys, if you're interested in podcasting, in helping to build a platform and start or enhance your ecosystem for your business and monetize it, join me on Tuesday, May 11th, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and Tuesday, May 18th, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And these sessions are going to be about 2 hours each. And it's go to BEBpodcastprofits with the S.com, BEBpodcastprofits.com. I'm going to teach you everything I know about building a successful podcast, monetizing that podcast, and being able to grow your audience. BEBpodcastprofits.com. Now, all of that information can be found at BEBconnect.com, BEBconnect.com, which is a page on my website that has all of the links to everything I just told you. Now, if you want to connect with me, reach out to me. Anything long, family, hit me on my email at jjones@blackentrepreneurblueprint.com, JAYJONES @blackentrepreneurblueprint.com. Facebook, Black Entrepreneur Blueprint. Twitter, hit me at jjones001. That's JAYJONES001. Instagram, I got 2 Instagram accounts. The main one I use is jjones for real, JAYJONES, the number 4, REAL. And I also have Instagram, Black Entrepreneur Blueprint. Hit me on both of them, a little different content on each. YouTube, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, family. You can go to YouTube, type in Black Entrepreneur Blueprint, hit that subscribe button. I have additional content on YouTube that is not on the podcast. Yes, the podcast does come out on YouTube every week, but I have additional content on there also. LinkedIn, connect with me, J Jones, Black Entrepreneur Blueprint. Also, Clubhouse. If you're on Clubhouse, I'm about to start doing some more things on Clubhouse. I was on there the other week on a panel, but you can get at me at I am J Jones on Clubhouse, at I am J Jones. Once again, everything I just told you guys is at BEBconnect.com, BEBconnect.com. All right, let's get ready to close it on out. We're going to talk about monetization and also how to get listeners for your new podcast. And today's topic is how to start a successful podcast and make money in 2021. Now, let's start talking about how to get listeners. All right. So that's the biggest thing, obviously, with a podcast. Most people don't have a lot of listeners, and you don't expect to have a lot of listeners when you start out. So once again, you're not doing this solely to make money. This is a piece of your ecosystem. It's content that you're providing, hopefully quality content. All right. So now you want to start building your database first while you're preparing your podcast. Perfect example. I was telling you about my buddy with this wine newsletter. So the first thing that I told him to do, start getting an email autoresponder, start getting people on your database. So when your podcast drops, while you're figuring out the technical aspects, while you're practicing how to talk on the podcast, or if it's a video, YouTube podcast or whatever, all of that stuff is fine and dandy. But I told you guys on many occasions, one of the biggest reasons that or things that people do backwards is they create their product or service, then they turn around and start scratching their head. Well, who's going to buy it? Who's going to listen to it? So you want to have that database prior to dropping the podcast. Now, the first thing that I'm going to tell you to do, and I know y'all probably like, man, this cat's talking these newsletters again. Yeah, is build your database using a newsletter. You can use a lead magnet if you want, but if you have a newsletter, I'm telling you, it's a lot more less intrusive. So if you're doing a personal finance podcast, I would recommend doing a personal finance newsletter. And you don't have to create all the articles. You can go and aggregate these articles and then curate the articles each week to build that list. And the reason I say use a newsletter first is, number one, it's non-threatening. Hey, you want to learn about personal finance? Join up for my new ABC Personal Finance newsletter. Comes out once a week. Great content. Now you don't have to scour the internet because all of the content you need is right here in this newsletter. Very non-threatening. Okay. Now, you build that up and you create that content. Now, this is something that's going to be in the training too. So I'm not going to go real deep, but you can also go to milliondollarnewsletter.com. That's milliondollarnewsletter.com. And that's all about building a newsletter. So right now we're talking about how to get listeners. So the first thing you want to do is you want to start building your database of prospective podcast listeners while you're working on your podcast. And as I was saying, my buddy who has the wine podcast, this is what I was telling him. This is what you need to do. Create a wine newsletter. Let people sign up. And guess what's going to happen? Once your podcast is ready to launch, there's going to be links in the newsletter and you can promote it that way. Okay. Next, another thing you want to do to get listeners, you want to aggregate your content for your niche in your newsletters, your niche in your newsletters. So you want to aggregate that content. And so newsletters, I'm telling you, it's very simple. If you go to rasa.io, that's who I use for all my newsletters. You put in a couple of sources, and then you can actually have articles and content pulled into your back office. And if you're doing a once a week newsletter, you go through that content, click yay or nay, and then that content will go out in your newsletter. And for example, if you don't want to create any content, you don't have to. So one of the things in the BEB Lifestyle newsletter on Mondays, if you want show notes, make sure you sign up for the newsletter because there's always a link to the podcast and the show notes. So if you have a new podcast and you have a newsletter, you create a link to your podcast in the newsletter that goes out to everybody. And now you're going to start getting people to subscribe to your podcast too. All right. So now we're talking about how to get listeners. Build your database first using a newsletter, be it weekly or bi-weekly, once a week newsletter or twice a week newsletter. I wouldn't do much more than that unless you're doing something that you have daily fluctuations. So for example, if you're into sports, right, like my Philly Sports Roundup newsletter, that has to be daily because teams are playing every day. But I would recommend at least once a week, no more really than twice a week, unless it's something that changes on a daily basis. So if you're doing a finance newsletter or stock market newsletter, that probably needs to go out Monday through Friday because things are changing. All right. So how to get listeners, build your database first using a newsletter, aggregate content for your niche in your newsletter. Then you can run ads in Facebook, Instagram, and post on LinkedIn about your newsletter to build the audience. So if you have a good newsletter and you can find groups in Facebook, you can do Instagram ads and LinkedIn ads. Hey, it's non-threatening. Join my new personal finance newsletter. And you can get listeners that way once you get them on the newsletter and you introduce them to the podcast. Next, you can announce your podcast in your newsletter, obviously, and drop a link to the subscribers. You can run ads in Facebook, Instagram, and post on LinkedIn about your podcast, not just the newsletter. Once your podcast drops, you can actually post about your podcast and create links there. Okay. Now, here's a couple of different things you want to think about. Excuse me. I'm still getting over this cold here. Are you going to do an interview style podcast, right? Or are you going to do a solo show? How long will your podcast be? I mentioned Neil Patel and Billie Jean. They do a daily 5-minute podcast. Are you going to have tips or actionable steps, etc.? What does your audience want and how can you deliver that? So you just want to identify your audience, identify what they want, and figure out how to deliver that. Okay, so that's how you get listeners. And that's what I recommend. Now, remember, it's easier to get listeners or prospective listeners building your database, guys, before your podcast drops. So if you know absolutely nothing about podcasting, it's going to take you a minute. It's going to take you a minute to understand, how to pick a host, how to upload your content, how to connect with all the different podcast platforms, Stitcher, iTunes, Apple Play, all of that stuff. So it's going to take a minute. But while you're doing that, while you're figuring it out, then you need to be creating your database. So once you get it and you get a couple of shows in the can, then you're ready to rock and you're ready to launch. Yo, here's my podcast. I talk about personal finance in my newsletter. Guess what? Now I have a personal finance podcast. Check it out. That's how you build. That's what I didn't know or didn't do when I came out, because I had no idea. So if you come to the BEBpodcastprofits.com trainings, then I'm going to teach you all of that stuff. All right. So we talked about how to get listeners. The last part we want to talk about, which is the good part, is the monetization part. All right. So it's all about monetization. And let me tell you guys too that are thinking, well, why is this dude talking about these newsletters? And the monetization with the combination of a podcast and a newsletter is exponentially greater. So most times people comparing apples to apples, and I'm going to give you the cost per thousand that people usually make per podcast, and you're going to be like, damn, that's it. And so we're going to go through that. But you want people to compare apples to oranges, not apples to apples. Because if you're only working on the number of downloads you have, there's a formula that most people use that, hey, man, you're only doing 1,000 downloads a month. Man, I'm only paying $22 per thousand. But let me break into the monetization, and we're going to go over a couple things. So podcast audience size is determined by how many downloads each episode receives on an average of over a 30-day period. Let me repeat that. Your podcast audience size is determined by how many downloads each episode receives on average over a 30-day period. So if I had a podcast and in a 30-day period I had 4 episodes, and if each episode at the end of that 30 days I got 40,000 downloads total, right? That means that I'm averaging 10,000 downloads for each of those 4 episodes. Now, one may have 15, the other may have 5, another may have 10, and the other may have another 10. But what you do is your podcast audience size is determined by how many downloads each episode receives on average over a 30-day period. How many downloads did I get in 30 days, and how many episodes did I have? So the CPM, or cost per mil, which means cost per thousand, okay? Just for the podcast. I'm not talking about a podcast and a newsletter. That's why I'm telling you guys to build a newsletter. So these are the latest numbers, right? If you have 500 to 999 downloads per episode, a 30-second spot is $22 per thousand, right? So that means you only got 500 to 1,000 people, right? You do a 30-second ad, that costs you're only charging $22, right? Which is nothing. For a 60-second ad is $23. So you see, if you're just selling podcast downloads or CPM, you got to be doing crazy numbers. If you're Joe Rogan doing 1 million downloads per episode, that's something different. Now, let's go up. If you're doing 5,000 for a 30-second ad, right? That's about $23. 5,000, average 5,000 per episode for a 30-second spot, 31 for a 60-second spot. So the numbers get a little better. But really, just say if you're doing 10,000 downloads an episode, which I'm going to tell you guys is a lot. The average episode, I think I said this on one of the other shows, the median, and that's counting the Joe Rogans and all these big guys out there, I think is like 1,100 downloads per month. The average podcaster usually gets a little over 100 podcast downloads a month. You heard what I said. Most people don't even get more than 100 podcast downloads a month. The median is like 1,100, I believe, downloads per month. So you gotta, if you're selling on cost per thousand or CPM, you're not gonna make any money. Trust me, unless your thing just goes bonkers. So that's why you need to build in a newsletter, and we're gonna talk about how combining a newsletter audience and your podcast audience is going to allow you to make more money from sponsors and advertising. You see, everybody else is just selling, cost CPM, cost per thousand. No, I don't do that, Mr. or Mrs. Sponsor or advertiser. I have a sufficient database of newsletter followers that are aligned with my podcast. So our package starts at $250. You could have 1,000 downloads per month. Our package starts at $250 per spot, because I have a newsletter database of 8,000 people, and I have my podcast. So we're going to talk about that real quick. So monetization, you can look at podcast sponsorship slash advertising, but you got to get a couple of numbers up. All right. Even if your podcast download numbers are low, if you have a newsletter audience database that's big, that's all you need, because that's going to spark that. That's going to start that whole thing. All right. Also, you can get revenue from affiliate products you talk about. So, on my podcast, I don't take sponsorships. I think I might start if for Black-owned companies. But I've had QuickBooks, FreshBooks, General Motors. So many people have been reaching out to me for me to sponsor. So if you get numbers, right, you can get revenues from affiliate products. And you hear it all the time on other podcasts. Today's episode is sponsored by FreshBooks. They get money for that. Other revenues from your own products or services, right? So if you have an online course, you got a personal finance podcast and newsletter, you have an online course about cleaning up credit, or something about how to build wealth, whatever. So you can monetize revenues from your own products or services. Also, guys, don't sleep on the newsletter monetization into and of itself. So now you can run ads or tag-alongs in your newsletter, paid advertising or sponsorships. Okay. Once again, if you're doing a personal finance podcast, and say Visa may want to advertise with you, they may have a new Visa credit card out or whatever. So you can use in conjunction the podcast and the newsletter, or the podcast can be a standalone. So once again, this is what I'm talking about, creating the apples to oranges versus apples to apples. You're not like everybody else. Okay. Also, in terms of newsletter content, yeah, and I'm going to be teaching this in the course. Where do you get your content from? How do you pull it in? It's very easy to get content and content sources set up. There's a company called feedspot.com, and that will give you actual content resources. You can type in what are the most popular personal finance blogs, websites, or influencers, and you can get a list, and then you can put that into your newsletter software back office, and it'll automatically pull out articles that you can use for your newsletter. I'm not going to get too deep into that. Okay. So you're looking at feedspot.com and rasa.io. Also, you can make more money, like I said, guys, by selling ad packages for the podcast and newsletter. Create an apples to oranges scenario versus an apples to apples, because most times when people advertise on podcasts, all they talk about is cost per thousand. Well, what's your cost per thousand and how many downloads do you do? Wait a minute, that's not how I do it. I have the newsletter, which is perfectly aligned with the podcast, and I have the podcast. So what you're doing, guys, is you're using the synergies between the newsletter and the podcast to grow both entities. And what are these entities? They're your platform. So once again, guys, I'm trying to tell you, as my grandma used to say, I tried to told you, son. I tried to told you, right? You got to build a platform, man. The easiest way to me where you can be anonymous, you don't have to create the content, is a newsletter. The podcast, once again, that's got to be you building that podcast and just aligning it with, whatever your products or services are, or aligning it with something that you're passionate about or what your business is about. And once again, I use the example of the personal finance podcast. That's somebody's business. And my buddy who's doing the wine podcast, that's something that they're passionate about. So there are two examples of how you can create podcasts conjoined with newsletters to synergize and build your platforms. And once you have a platform, family, I was telling my cousin the other day, you can sell anything on that platform as long as it's aligned with your audience. So new products or services come out. Guess what? Share it with your audience. You're turning the faucet on. Guys, I'm telling you, it's not that hard. It's actually simple. The process is simple, but you just got to follow the steps. So once again, if podcasting is something that you're interested in doing, or you have a podcast and you're trying to level that podcast up and monetize it, join me at bebpodcastprofits.com. You get all the information there. You can register there. Only the first 10 people will be accepted because, once again, I can't work with so many people. If you need personal assistance, bebpodcastprofits with an S.com. Podcast, PROFITS.com. You can enroll there. And once again, the first session is on Tuesday, May 11th, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the second session is Tuesday, May 18th, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And each session is going to run for about 2 hours. And if you happen to if you enroll and miss one or both of the sessions, you'll have direct replay access 24/7, 365. Now, before we close on out, guys, I say this each and every week, but hey, man, we get more and more downloads each and every week because of you guys, the BEB family. I appreciate you guys, and I definitely couldn't do it without you. It's funny, man. My cousin was like, "Damn, boy, you've been rocking for that long." Yeah, man, I'm committed to it. I'm committed to the mission, and it's about building an economic power base in the Black community. That is the mission, which supersedes me as an individual. It supersedes you guys as individuals. It's a community thing. It's a community effort. It's about the community. It ain't about me. It ain't about you. It's about us. And so please continue to spread the word about the podcast, the blog, the movement. Very shortly, guys, in the next, say, month, this brand new rebranded BEB website, rebranded logos is coming out, man, and I'm telling you, it's going to be fantastic. So I got my guys working in the background right now, and when this thing pops, man, I'm telling you, it's going to be a lot more resources and content for the BEB family to go to, and all they're going to have to do is go to blackentrepreneurBlueprint.com or bebconnect.com, and it's going to give you a personalized walkthrough on the website and connect you with resources that you specifically need. So if you don't want to learn about podcasting, don't worry about it. You answer a couple questions, it's going to take you here. It's going to ask you, what do you need help with? And then it's going to show you and direct you to resources. So I'm so super excited about this new website coming up within the next month or so. Also, on this new rebranded website, I'm also going to have partners and resources, and I'll talk about that in another episode. So if you actually have a service that the BEB family can benefit from, reach out to me. And we'll talk about that type of stuff because I want to give people resources where they can move their business from point A to point B and take actionable steps. Make sure, guys, you tune in. And if you're interested in the bebpodcastprofits.com, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing you guys there within the next 2 weeks if it's something that you're interested in. Love you guys. See you same time next week. Peace.